Thank you for everyone that's come to join our stream today. I'm joined here by Dave Russel.
Hey, hey.
And we're going to be covering some information about all of the transport modes that we offer, a little bit about data mobility, and so much more that comes about from these components. Did you want to go ahead and introduce yourself, Dave? A little bit about your background and what you do?
Hey, yep, I am Dave Russell here at Product Strategy Veeam Software and ostensibly look after the enterprise segment, but really all.
Thank you. We'll go ahead and dive right in here. And I wanted to point out that we have 5 different transport modes. Pretty much a transport mode for any kind of environment, whether you're wanting for a simple deployment or something that's integrated into your components and software. Can you tell us a little bit about backgrounds and why transport modes are so important, or why you feel they're so important for us to have?
There, hopefully that fixed everything.
Yeah, I was just asking if you could tell us a little bit about why having so many transport modes is important, or why is it important to the industry.
Yeah, I think really it's about optimization, Corinne. You know that there's very different kinds of communication protocols or ways that we can move data, ingest data from our proxies, and then bring them into the Veeam repository. Some are more basic than others. Some are default, meaning they would work in any situation. Some are more advanced as we'll go through there and look through the 5 different ways that we can actually achieve this. But I think it comes down to flexibility, optimizing performance, but having the kind of a fallback mode to where if you don't have certain kinds of connective capabilities or infrastructure, that you're able to optimize your transport of data and just as much data as you can, ideally as fast as you can.
Right. So, to kick it off here, we're going to take a look at our network mode, which is one of those basic modes that you were talking about earlier. It just works. It
Yep.
accesses the VM kernel. And as long as it has access to that VM kernel, you're transferring data. It's the easiest to configure, and if you have 10 gig networks throughout your infrastructure, it might actually be the fastest transport mode that you can select and use in your environment, because there's no transferring of disk or mounting and unmounting of disk. There doesn't have to be a snapshot and then a storage snapshot. It takes out a lot of that front end process. We'll see throughout here how a lot of these have a lot more connectivity and processing, but it's literally connection one from the hypervisor host to the proxy. The proxy talks back to the host once it's been authenticated, and it communicates with the production storage, and the data goes to the repository. Very simple.
Mm-hmm.
Now
Mm-hmm.
we step up the complexity a little with our virtual appliance mode, or what we call hot add. And what this does is once we've taken a snapshot on a virtual machine, it unlocks those base disks, and then we hot add, which is where this term hot add mode comes from, those disks to another machine, which is going to be like the proxy that sits directly on the host, as you can see in this diagram. And it will take a VM disk that comes from this VM that's been unlocked and attach it to this proxy to directly back up from that proxy down to the repository. A benefit of this mode is you're more directly connected to your data. One of the drawbacks, it does need a little bit higher permission in your environment. You have to worry kind of where your proxies are at. When you're using this kind of mode, you want to think about having maybe a proxy on all of your servers, because you're going to be hot adding those disks to those proxies across servers and worrying about different storage levels. So if you're working off of a SAN, or that's going to be presenting from one host, that storage, across to other hosts, or an NFS data store, which is projecting out to all of those hosts. Hot adding those disks to this appliance can cause a drag on your storage, or it may not have as high of a performance. But if you're using and tapping into that local storage that's on that host and you have those proxies on that host, you can see a tremendous uptick on performance for transfer and less jumps where that data has to go. Now we're talking about direct SAN mode and any type of NFS data stores. We're directly tapping into the storage at that point. So it matters less where that storage is at. So a lot of infrastructures that have a vSAN environment where your storage is in one location and your host all access that storage, or multiple locations and your host access that storage, we can have a physical server, which would be the proxy down here, having a direct connection into that storage, taking all of that load off of your host and processing the data for the VMs directly from the storage. But as you can see, there's a lot more complexity here. There's 7 steps that it shows in this chart where we have to communicate with the host, create that snapshot to get the consistent state of that VM. Then we have to communicate down to the production data store and say, hey, where are these disks actually sitting on this data store? And then we come back and tell the Veeam server, okay, this is where you need to go access those disks. And then we're able to communicate through the host to get those disks and directly transfer them to the proxy once we've located where those are at, and send them off to the repository. This again does take a little bit more setup than just maybe like our network mode. So you're kind of trading off what you're going to give permission to, because you do need read permission to that SAN, and you have to think about later if you want to be able to write to that SAN under that same direct SAN mode, you have to give us write permissions, and not all administrators are comfortable with giving write permissions to another device to those doors, or those proxies. They are in shared offline mode, so there shouldn't be anything that happens, but there's always that possibility that an administrator that doesn't understand that those need to be left in shared offline when mounted to this proxy, you can run into problems. Direct NFS mode actually uses our NFS client, which is installed onto the backup proxy. So from the NFS client, we work a lot, or in a very similar way as we do for the initial communication for direct SAN, except when we access the storage to find out where those virtual machines are, we tap into the NFS client so that we can read those data stores properly and pull them back off of that NAS. Last but not least, we're actually tapping into something that's a little deeper. This is going to be your underlying storage system. And to do this, we use a native protocol that exists on a lot of industry standard storage systems that are out there today. And we'll create a VMware snapshot, and then we'll immediately go down to that storage and tap into those storage systems to create a storage snapshot. That storage snapshot allows the VM to go back into a running state without that extra Delta file from the snapshot, meaning that we can pull all of those backup files from that storage snapshot, lessening the load on the VM and the overall infrastructure, and push it through that backup proxy. Now, that's a lot, and there's no one fix fits all for all infrastructures, which allows us to use any of these transport modes for any of the disks. So if you have an NFS data store and one of the disks that you are not able to get it into a state where we can back it up through the NFS data store, but it maybe has a local storage access, we could use network mode for that one disk and the NFS data store direct connect type of link to take as much load off the production as possible to still get that backup. And as we were talking about earlier, if you back up via direct SAN and you don't want to give access back to the host for a write access directly to that data store, You could always choose a restore option that is maybe virtual appliance or just failing back to a network mode if you decide that you need to restore, which I think is what makes it really invaluable, that you're not locked into one of these modes. You use what
Right.
mode you need when you need that mode.
Yeah, that's all fantastic. And the thing I think that is important to note here is there's a few options you can configure Veeam in, meaning you can actually direct Veeam to use the optimal transport mode on your behalf. You can also code a preference, but then have it default to, say, network mode if for some reason you've misconfigured something or your preferred mode is unavailable. And one thing I always like to point out without sort of going into maybe too much detail, though, is Veeam itself did a number of optimizations around these transport modes, even network mode, meaning we Veeam rewrote or enhanced the VMware provided default mode to really reduce the I/O stack to optimize the data fetching.
Right. And we actually did get a question. It's about our direct SAN mode. The question was if we're able to isolate the backup traffic over the iSCSI or fiber channel SAN with direct SAN mode, if the repository supports it. And yes, you actually create connections to the data store, and you designate what connections have connections to that data store and what iSCSI connection or which fabric that you're going to run over to give those connections to the physical machine or virtual machine that you have processing the direct SAN mode. So you are able to isolate out where your management traffic and your backup traffic are going to be.
That's a good point.
There's so many configurations and ways that you can lock down your environment. And we had a shout out from Al saying hi, that he's going to be with us in a few minutes.
Awesome.
All right. So, a hot topic anymore, CapEx versus OpEx. And I was kind of hesitant putting the language in the slide this way because I don't think they're pitted against each other. I think it's a happy mix of both depending on what your environment demands and what you're planning to do. Do you agree?
Yeah, it's a good point. It's not a case of good or bad. They're just different expenditure models. Both have pro and con. I mean, certainly OpEx is attractive in the sense that you don't have as high upfront costs. CapEx, you might have higher upfront costs for sure, but you over time could end up spending less money. It's really about how you want to consume it and whether or not you want to own the resources or you would prefer to rent the resources.
It's a great point. And we actually have some from our industry standard Gartner taking a look at some of the models and some of the shifts that we're seeing in the market. And I think you have a great background with Gartner and how they do analyzing or how they analyze the business, the IT business as a whole.
Yeah, the interesting thing here, and then the next slide that we'll touch on here in a moment, is you can see the shift over time. It looks subtle, meaning if you go back a little over a half a decade ago, a 70-30 split, 70% oriented in the dark blue towards more, what you've got OpEx versus CapEx. And you can see the shift or the trend is, a desire to increasingly change your exposure. And one thing to point out is, this in the next slide, this is probably going to change or accelerate even more, Corinne, don't you think, with the current pandemic that we find ourselves in? Because as a mix, what we see from a cloud perspective and then an on-prem perspective, there's likely to be more consumption of software as a service or people doing infrastructure as a service and platform as a service activities for that matter.
Yeah, and with this change, like you were talking about, the situation that we're living in today, I would almost venture to say that these numbers don't reflect how much we really think cloud's going to explode because how easy it makes this work at home life become. And I've heard companies even going, this is working. We're not going
Yeah.
back when it opens up. Why do we pay for a building when we have all of these fantastic operational tools out there in the cloud to work with?
No, that's a great point. I mean, I know many of the hyperscalers or larger, environments, be it, Google is just but one example. They are discovering exactly what you mentioned, that, they're not taking any kind of hit in terms of productivity, in terms of availability of their resources, and they're able to, maintain costs. So we could actually see current world events as an accelerant. Usually things in the data center move slowly over time. This might actually be something that increases the velocity of adoption.
So this is an interesting chart. Can you take us through what they're trying to tell us here?
Yeah, the mix, you almost start in the middle first, meaning the total IT spend band. And you could see we're talking about it in just enormous amount of money, trillions of dollars, quite literally, not figuratively. And no surprise, that is going up. They're showing a compounded annual growth rate of 3%. And obviously, this is pre-COVID-19 estimated, so there's going to be some impact. But IT spend on the rise, that's probably not horribly surprising, but the amount of money, and even at a CAGR, a compound annual growth of 3%, that sounds low. And you can see it ends up being materially real significant dollars, going back from just a few years ago to just a few years in the future. We're talking well over $500 million. I mean, that's a fantastic amount of spend. Now, look at that over time, same kind of range in the cloud spending, and the growth rate is phenomenal. It is literally over 5 times higher, the mix or compound annual growth rate of what we're shifting over from on-prem to cloud. And what that actually represents then as a percentage of your budget is nearly doubling in a 5-year period, meaning that the orange boxes there. That is very amazing. I mean, that's almost like a tectonic shift in resource allocation. And obviously, some organizations are going to adopt this faster than others. And certainly world events might accelerate this more so than it might have from this initial estimate. But sort of the move towards cloud is arguably undeniable. But I like your point that it doesn't mean that everyone's going to go entirely to the cloud. There's good reasons why you want to have a hybrid mix.
Yeah. So, if you had to theorize, what do you think? What type of cloud are we moving to? What's the next big thing if you had a bet on it?
I think it's going to be multifaceted. So there's one saying that likes to, analyze where we're at today and say every organization or almost every organization is already multi-cloud today, meaning somewhere, if you're a good size business, somebody's got an AWS account, at least a few of them. Somebody's running some kind of software as a service. Maybe it's O365 or Workday or Salesforce. And then chances are someone's doing some kind of R&D work in, maybe say it's Azure. So that continued mix of consuming cloud services in a variety of different ways, from end-to-end product like SaaS to experimentation, to lift and shift, meaning we're going to take on-prem SQL Server and move it to Azure, to brand new deployment models, maybe Cassandra over multiple instances in AWS, completely revamping or replatforming. Those are just but 3 examples, but for many of us, I think we're going to see a range of different cloud exploitive opportunities that we'll be seizing.
What's something that you've had a chance to use more recently due to situation?
Definitely storing more data, using SharePoint Online, or I guess I would call it Microsoft Office 365. It is the way we collaborate, more and more. But also, right now, Look how we're interacting over, you know, basically through the cloud onto various communication platforms right now. So whether it's video conferencing or whether it's doing live streams, that's only going to become more prevalent. And in some cases, these are being recorded, and that's going to affect everything from education, meaning formal education, to the way businesses interact.
Yeah, and not to mention, or just say, you're almost literally on the other side of the country from me right now.
That's true.
And
Yeah,
we're
I'm in
able,
Tucson, Arizona, and you're in Columbus, Ohio, and the we could just as easily be in the same office.
so data mobility and portability. I'd like to take a moment just to think about how these terms are used interchangeably, but how they can have their own identities. So, the mobility of your data, being able to move it not only from one point to another, but different platforms. Whether you're in the cloud, you're back on premises, you have your Internet of Things, your phones. You can move your data across these different bridges, and I don't know if we thought it would be as big as it is today. Could you ever think that you wouldn't have to carry around a hard drive because it's already with you?
Yeah, it is. It is interesting. I mean, there was a time really when owning your data and having it, close to you, and actually also ensuring the opposite, that others couldn't get at your data, and that it was, centralized and very much secured, was more the norm. And now we've really kind of come full circle on that. And as we, talk through the cloud piece of that, and we'll double click on this even further. The more you're going to consider a multi-cloud environment, the more both of these become important. And I liked how you phrased, they have their own identity, they have their own characteristics, those two words.
Yeah. And portability, meaning that it's in a format that you're not just sending that raw data somewhere, it has meaning when it gets to the other side. I I remember trying to get an e-reader file once that would read on my Kindle, but they had 6 or 7 different e-readers out at the time, and even if I had a book, it was only for this one device, and I couldn't move it back and forth even if I copied over those files directly. So I wasn't able to get the book where I wanted it even though the data was there. Making
Mm.
sure it's in that portable format so that when I open it up on my Kindle versus my friend's Nook, I was able to read that same book. I think is very important aspect, and I think I'd say that's the defining factor for portability. Wouldn't you say?
Yeah, absolutely. And, part of portability, I suppose mobility as well, to me, is about trying to future proof yourself, right? Because we don't know 5 years from now, in number of days from now, really, why we might want to move data evacuated from one location, instantiated elsewhere, or what kind of event, whether it's man-made or just business-oriented, we're going to get a more favorable cost structure if we move from location A to location B. I think just having the sort of peace of mind, but knowing you've got the capability to move data and that you can reinstantiate it where you want to, when you want to, really unlocks the value of data. And then that's certainly, as a data capture, data provider, Veeam, that's really what we want to enable.
I think we've kind of mastered that, I would say. And we made that more possible with our software defined storage infrastructure. We allowed just different kinds of storage. We didn't care what they were, logical units that we took them in as extents, and made them a repository which you could send to any of them at any time without worrying about commands and protocols and the types of ways that they're connected. It just worked. And then we even went a step further to tap into that cloud. The industry, everyone wants to hear the term cloud with our capacity tier, allowing us to send those off to an entirely foreign object storage tier. I mean, object storage, the way that files are stored is almost no way that we do it on premises. It's a data file format that's not generally readable by the average person either for that efficiency that they offer in the cloud. But we found a way to take those on-prem infrastructure, software-defined storage, and offload those backups to a additional offsite location up in public and private clouds with S3 storage. And then we took it even a step further with Amazon S3 Object Lock. And I like setting up Object Lock on an Amazon S3 storage because it gives a very old school term, and you're only going to know this term most likely is if you worked with tape. And they compare this feature when you turn it on to the object storage bucket in Amazon. They say this is the same as having a worm tape infrastructure. Do you know what worm is?
Yes, indeed. Write once, read many. For those of us that also, in addition to handling tape, I can remember making CDs, and eventually CD recordable kind of came into market. It wasn't all that popular, but the notion was very similar there with compact discs.
So we now have worm in the cloud. So I think the biggest problem people had when it initially came to adopting cloud into your infrastructure was this idea of your data not being secure because it's somewhere else. But we've now given everyone a peace of mind with this object storage that allows their backups to be locked offsite without the management of a tape server, cleaning that tape server, making sure you have an administrator there to physically put in and pull out tapes so you got your offline tapes, even if just the load of having that server in your infrastructure. Not completely disregarding tape, because tape's not dead for anyone that wants to use a tape server. It's still the cheapest storage out there, hands down.
Yep.
But
Yep.
this is an off-site copy of your data that is locked hands off. I think that sends a pretty powerful message.
Yeah, I like how you characterize tape still having a role. I mean, it's just a tool, right? It's just a media that can be used for, in certain situations, exhibit incredible benefits. It's still very much a part of the recovery hierarchy. It's certainly something that Veeam supports and will continue to support. But then the nice thing about what we've got here is it's very transparent, as we'll see, meaning it's very easy. It doesn't disrupt your workflow. It doesn't require any oversight or extra configuration. And the mutability part of that is, in addition to things like ransomware, it's even accidental deletion. It is sort of like putting the safety switch, on your data so that if someone misconfigures part of the environment or mistakenly believes that they should remove or evacuate data or even outright delete it before it really should be, that it protects yourself even from yourself as a business.
Great point. So I'd like to break off a little how the cloud tier works, because not only did our capacity tier works, it not only allows you to get that copy off site, but it allows you to make your footprint on-prem smaller too. We offer the ability to take that data that you originally had on site and keep a metadata file, which is very small in comparison, and send the majority of that data up to the cloud. So your capacity tier is your capacity when your on-premises environment can be your immediate copies, the things that you need today and the things that you may need down the line or for tomorrow or any types of audits. You don't have to account for that storage anymore. You don't have to continue to, every year you gotta be that IT guy that walks into the room and has to convince your boss why you need this much extra space. This gives you that infinite capacity to work with.
And you alluded to it, Corinne, but there's enormous savings associated with that. I mean, it's essentially source side deduplicating, or maybe instead more specifically, it is no duping, meaning, we're looking to see if we've already sent that data payload first, and then we don't need to send that again. The same is true on the restore side. If we can source the needed block from what's available in our performance tier or on-prem pool, then we can do that. And that has the benefit of not only speed, but avoiding egress charges as well. And then maybe two other really quick things. This is an illustrative slide. Don't want to suggest that our level of metadata, you see one blue bar to every two green bars or boxes there. It is not a 1-to-3 ratio, or 1/3 of the overall size is taken up by metadata. This is just to be illustrative. But the key part about where you see blue is that the metadata transfers with the data payload to the object storage itself, so that even if your on-prem environment is compromised in some manner or machine failure, you can still rehydrate, reconstruct your data without having to rebuild an environment. You're not put at risk, in other words. You don't have a single side of failure.
And you were talking about those egress charges. I'd also like to point out the ingress charges, because Veeam has a built-in capability that we hash those blocks before we send them off to the cloud. And if there's already an object in storage up there that is the same object we'd be sending up redundantly, we go ahead and just bypass that and put it into that metadata file to reference the other block that's already up there for us to pull back down. So you save money in the long term, continuously running backups up there for blocks that aren't unique, which is great.
Yes.
And to portability. This is what I was talking about earlier with the Kindle versus the Nook. Trying to get those proprietary formats to talk to each other is nearly impossible, and pages of, oh, we can transfer this file for you, it doesn't work. So not only do we take all of the infrastructures, whether it's vSphere, Hyper-V, Nutanix, and then our physical machines, our Windows and Linux machines, we format them all into this familiar VBK file. And then we have our incrementals and whatever, but it's the same file format. And we give it the same ability to restore across the board. So if you're backing up your VMware environment and you lose your on-premises infrastructure, you're able to restore up to one of our supported cloud stacks. It's just so versatile how we can restore this data.
Yeah, and I think it's worth pointing out that on the left, the workload side, there are the multiple hypervisors, there are the multiple operating systems, but that represents multiple machine types, meaning it can be a server, it can be a laptop or an endpoint. So there are many reasons why you might want to be able to take different kinds of data, a laptop image, and move that up. Say an employee's left the business, but you want to be able to store that somewhere or eventually access that and have freedom in terms of how you want to access that, where you would like to point that to, and directly to be able to recover into vSphere, into Hyper-V, offers a lot of flexibility.
Are your physical agents machines? P2V used to be it would give your administrator chest pains, I would say. Then you said that you wanted to move from, what do you mean you want to move this physical machine to a virtual machine? Do you understand the work that needs to happen here? And we can do it natively now. You can back up your Windows agents machine and restore it directly to Hyper-V, and it'll do all the disk conversions for you. How cool is that?
Yeah, transparent. There's nothing to configure. There's nothing to oversee. There are no steps that you need to take to make sure you sequence things in a proper order, which was part of the concern of P2V. back in the day, is if you did certain things out of sequence, you could break the machine image and not know that until you thought you were done.
Right. And we even have what we can do is I have started to say P to C because we can go from physical to cloud even. That's amazing. So I have come to know this is your favorite utility and probably one of the best kept secrets of our
Yeah, this
software.
I love this extract utility, and it's a no charge capability of Veeam. In fact, just last month, I guess it was almost 4 weeks ago, mid April, let's say, we actually now make this downloadable from the Veeam website as a separate download. I mean, you don't have to just download all of Veeam or even the community edition to get your hands on this. You can just go download it directly. But think of this like a PDF reader. This enables you lightweight piece of software, as it says there. Runs on Windows, runs on Linux. It allows you to go and get access into VBK files, and it gives you a certain level of freedom and flexibility. I mean, if worse things happen to you, you don't have to worry about standing up a Veeam environment. Now, as you alluded to, Corinne, the way that we write data into a VBK format is self-describing. We can reconstitute it. So it's not that we have to go and take a backup of our catalog and re-import that. Some solutions that are on the market, you would have to go build the backup server, import the backup catalog, and then you could start trying to bring back the data that was on your media. Here, you can completely obviate that step. Now, you could absolutely go stand up another instance of Veeam. You could absolutely download a no-charge version or free version of our product called Community Edition and access your data. But one of the things that I like is I just have three actually of these 2 terabyte SSDs, flash drives. I just happen to use SanDisk. It's going over a USB-C cable. I can plug that right in to my Windows laptop, run the Veeam agent, Windows agent, write data onto here, but I also put a copy of the extract utility. It's very, very small, and literally I could go plug this into another machine, obviously use my credentials to get access to it, but immediately read the data without having to set up anything. I think that there's a lot of power in that, but it's also a testament to just how portable the backup format is. You don't need a lot of software, a lot of bits to be in place, and you don't have to go through a lot of work in order to get that file back or a whole series of files if you had to.
Yeah. I actually, I had a customer and he used one of our features called rotating media. Rotated media means that you have a job run and you can hot swap in hard drives so that you always have a hard drive offline. Well, he was one of those guys that you wanted as your admin because he was thorough. Every couple of weeks, he would pick up one of the hard drives that were going to be offline. He took it home with him, and he would run this utility to see if he could randomly restore a machine from another computer if he needed to for his own sanity and his peace of mind. He was sanity checking his job security with this utility, and it just
Nice.
took moments. And he even had his own script because you can run this through command line as well. He made a little executable. It would automatically access the drive, restore, and he could go to bed with easy. I think it's a powerful utility.
Definitely.
Now, we've talked a lot about restoring and portability of that file, but I think it's worth mentioning how many ways we can restore that file, because we restore and back up a lot of applications, and restoring the raw data and having to manually extract and put those back into their specific applications can be a nightmare. Ones to mention is Oracle, and if you've ever worked with Oracle trying to restore a raw file back, I'm sorry.
Mhm.
We restore files back in a way that makes sense to the application that we're restoring back to, which gives us the flexibility of 83 different ways in our software, whether you're exporting a file, emailing a file out, restoring to the new location, original location, a SQL database, maybe just a content library from SharePoint, using the Oracle RMAN console to restore the data in a friendly way. I mean, so many, including your Extract utility. It's
Hmm.
I think this is a very powerful message.
Yeah, and I want to make sure we don't leave anyone with the wrong impression. I mean, you don't have to know about 83 different options. You don't have to master or research, each one of these. It's really about interacting with data, bringing data back or restoring it in a way that you would like to, whether you're an application administrator, you're a help desk individual, you're just trying to get back a contact, maybe inside of Exchange, whatever the case may be. It's you can see if you look through the chart here, some of it depends on infrastructure, some depends on the workload that you're trying to protect, some has to do with the level of granularity. So it goes back to that notion of flexibility. It's powerful in its simplicity, is the way I like to think about it. But it's not a situation of I have to go and read a great deal about a whole multitude of ways, nearly 100 different ways to figure out how I want to get my data. The key is we leverage that portable data format within Veeam, and you have your whole menu of options about how you'd like to interact with that data. And you don't have to sort of make that determination up front, right? The data is still in that VBK format or that file format that we've been referencing. And now we offer a number of different ways that either you, an application or a script or some sort of automation solution can go and fetch that data.
That's an excellent point. And I'd like to say we have a lot of explorers, but they all have just about the same look and feel. They look like Windows File Explorer. If you've been in Windows File Explorer, I am very confident you could navigate any one of our Explore and Restore utilities. We make the consoles all have that same look and feel, but do everything an administrator may need to do. And in some cases, I think restoring through our software can be easier than restoring through some of the native applications that are available.
Yeah, I would agree.
Now for the fun part, the demo. So we're going to take a look at some of the portability and mobility, and I think my server may have just shut off. That's fun. So we'll go ahead and power that one back on. I love live demos. It always leaves something fun for you to do.
But that's real world, isn't it? Right? I mean, things happen, things time out, accidents can occur, networks can go down. I mean, that is the nature of IT in a nutshell.
Right? And thank you, virtual machines. You were so fast to reboot. It is amazing. Uh, let's see here. I'm generally not good about talking and typing my password at the same time, so bear with me. Now we'll let this machine boot up, and I kind of wanted to come over here to take a look at the AWS environment and that bucket that you're able to create with the object lock, because I like to point out that worm section. So we'll go ahead and just create a bucket here, and let's call it vRinne Twitch. That should be free. And we come down here to the advanced settings, and it's as easy as moving from disable to enable. And of course it makes you type the word enable. And if you've done anything inside of AWS, it pretty much has you type everything as a confirmation. So we come here and look, and it literally says read once, read many. It is a worm model to your object storage. I think that's great for that comparison. And it's that easy. You get the keys for this bucket and add the credentials into backup and replication, and you are sending off to a locked tier of storage for yourself. Let's see if the services have booted up. That's a couple moments. Actually, we can go ahead and take a look at, we're talking about cloud mobility and different platforms that we're working with. And this is going to be something that we're importing into the Veeam Backup and Replication console, or that I've already imported into the console. And this is one of our new softwares. What was it released on, like, Tuesday last week or a couple of weeks ago? It's very
Yeah,
new.
I think you're right. Yeah. Yeah.
And it's so easy to set up. When you're taking a look at this console, you deploy the application from the Azure Marketplace. And it is literally as easy as coming to your Azure Marketplace, which I guess that's not the right bookmark. Marketplace. And we'll click on it. And type in, and we actually have a few offerings in here, but we'll take a look at all of our Veeam. And you click on the Veeam Backup from Microsoft Azure and hit Get Now. It'll take you through that familiar interface for determining a virtual machine, what type of deployment you want to do. And if you've ever deployed a machine in Microsoft Azure, it's very simple. You select your name, your resource group, you tell it if you want to expand disk. If not, you can add some tags and you're done after you fill out this page. And you're able to sign in. Setting up the credentials is simple as 1, 2, 3. So you set up your account, which the account will automatically deploy for you if you tell it. We have a service account type to allow you to automatically send out a code and copy and paste, and your account's already configured for you with all the correct permissions. Nothing that you need to do there. Once you have your account, you can come add your repository, and if your repository is under your same account, it's as simple as hitting add and selecting the account where your storage is already configured. So it can be done in, from what I found, about 7 minutes, because I configured it on the wrong infrastructure, and it was really far away from me when I wanted it over here in the East 2, which is a little closer. So I moved it a little closer, and it took only 7 minutes to deploy the application, put in my credentials, and get started making a policy. And in my policy, I only have one machine here, but I have it added by group, so they're dynamic for how you can even configure these jobs. And I'm looking for the word edit as I'm talking. We work with multiple Active Directory domains, so if you're running in a full mesh environment, you can determine what side of your domain you want to authenticate with. We work with all of the regions. So if you come to add, we work with all 38 regions of Azure. Whether you're in Asia, in Africa, or you're here in the States, we got you covered. The resources can be added through either subscription, so you can try to back up your entire Azure subscription if that's how you feel that you need to move forward. You select specific resource groups. Or one of my favorite things is I'm a big proponent of making sure you're tagging everything as you go along inside of Azure. Tags are smart. Tags are dynamic. I don't care if you're using VMware or Azure. Tags are fun and dynamic. In this case, it was just this resource group. And the rest of this is more so if you're wanting to get into backing up and more knowledge. I do want to give a shout out to our calculator, though.
That's very cool.
Knowing how much it's going to cost you is important to me, at least.
I think we've all heard, scary stories about cloud bill surprises. This is a way to, the point isn't, oh, it's $1.83. The point is, is it what I expect? Is going to be something such that I didn't make a mistake, only to find out about it once I get sticker shock when the invoice comes.
Right. And we have the same types of native explorers, and it will take a couple moments because it has to spin up a worker in the background. So we'll let this kind of start to prepare that restore for what it looks like from this side.
And
But
I view this as good news, Rin, because the point here is that the workers are, essentially the agents or the actual lifters and data movers. They're dynamic, right? They're only there when you need them to be, and they, self-manage themselves. You don't have to go configure them or script something. It just invokes itself when needed and then terminates when it's not required.
right, and that's another one of those cost metrics. Our development spent many hours in meetings and rooms discussing how can we give this to customers for the best cost. And it's not the cost that you're paying us, it's the cost that you're paying the cloud. And I like the term, cloud is not a charity. And that is
Yes.
so very much true. So we've put the extra time and an effort to think about ways to save money when interacting with these cloud infrastructures. So we'll let that stew, and we'll come back over to Veeam Backup and Replication. And one of the great features that we've added into Veeam Backup and Replication is the option for an external repository. Now, this external repository is an object storage that we're using for, say, Veeam Backup for Azure or even Veeam Backup from AWS. And we're able to port those repositories back down into Veeam Backup and Replication so that we can see those backups. And this is the external repository, and this is the Azure storage that I have this backup going to in the cloud infrastructure. And if I come to home, I can see everything that's up there under my policy that I created, which is my little Linux machine that I can work with. And I can do something pretty cool from here. I can right click on this machine and instant recover that machine here on site from the backup repository that's up in the cloud without having to get back up into the cloud to be able to access this data.
That's right. You never left the interface, right? And that's just, and almost, this is a great way to kind of show a number of the capabilities we've been describing. Here's another restore method. You didn't have to do anything. You didn't have to go to a restore window. You simply right-clicked on the object that was being protected. And to your point, you didn't have to stage anything. You didn't have to go to another UI. It just happened seamlessly.
Yep. And it's already starting. And we'll see just in a couple moments as it pulls everything back down. We can take a look at maybe the restore interface is done over here. Nope, still spinning up that work. That's okay. Looks like it doesn't want to pull that back up. My guess is because I have it going on a lock on the Veeam Backup for Azure side, but I can show you the one that I did a little earlier that wasn't from a locked file, and I actually migrated that to my production environment. So if I come back down here under my VBAs, this is that same Linux box, and we'll go ahead and take a look. We can see it's live, but we'll go ahead and restart it here for ourselves so we can see that boot up. And this is a VM that I made in Azure, instant recovered to my local host, and then brought up to fully be on my local environment, and we can see it is literally starting up right now on premises.
There's our mobility and our portability right there, isn't it?
And for fun, we have an additional feature with Veeam for Amazon S3 storage with that immutable lock that we were taking a look at earlier. I went ahead and configured a scale out backup repository with that as the additional tier. And we'll take a look here. All you need to do is have a local storage and that object storage added in. And the wizard's pretty self-explanatory. There's only a couple steps to add all of these components to join them together. You select whatever your local repository is going to be, which in this case is an exagrid, so I'm saving space locally as well. And then selecting what kind of data locality you'd like, and selecting that object storage with the object lock. And you're done. Your storage has been added in, and you can port anything into that. And we'll come back over here, and we have the FLR link for that Veeam Backup for Azure. And you have to accept because there's a certificate it doesn't recognize, of course. No big deal. But tell me this doesn't look like File Explorer.
Right.
And you can path down through all of your folders, use the boot direct, or if you want to go into your home directory to see your user, which is me. And you can restore any files. You can add to a recovery list, so you can restore or download multiple files all at the same time. And we'll come back over here. So not only with the external repositories do we allow you to be able to access from the Veeam Backup and Replication console any machine that was on that repository locally, but you can create a backup copy job. This backup copy job allows you to copy those external repository VMs, which is going to be from this policy, to another storage, whether it's on premises or if you're sending it to a SOBR with the capacity tier like what I'm doing. So I am moving immediately from backing up in my Azure environment, copying it down locally, and immediately sending it up to an immutable tier. My Azure backups are immutable on AWS and still is restorable on that side as they are here. If I lost my entire Azure environment, I lost my on-premises environment, I could go up to the object storage, deploy an instance backup and replication, and restore these files. That's the apocalyptic standing point, but we also have those disgruntled administrators that have access to one side of the infrastructure, but you may not give them access to another. Separation of, what do we call it? Separation of rights or privilege?
Just a delineation of duties or separation of role and responsibility. And there can be, reasons why you might want to do that, either because it's, you have very sensitive data, it's very vital to the business. You want to make sure you've got multiple copies and, essentially following the 3-2-1-1-0 rule, very religiously, and ensuring that you've got different people, different media, different geographies, maybe different kind of retentions associated with something, so that if you absolutely have to bet your business on it, you're covered.
Yeah. And we've pretty much covered, I think, the mobility and portability of the data, but I wanted to go ahead and take a look at some of our explorers because we promoted them pretty heavily earlier, and I think it's going to show how easy they actually are and how they look. So it's easy as setting up, I want this virtual machine. You can give a reason if you want to. Probably in your actual environment you would. And you hit finish. And it's going to process in the background by pulling up that virtual machine file and emulating the files as if you were looking at that machine through a file explorer, like a Windows File Explorer window. We'll see that come up here.
Yeah, and as that's coming up, that really is kind of describing our backup format in a nutshell. It is essentially a file with file system overlaid on top of it, and now the Explorer comes along and is able to very quickly index and scan that and give you granular access.
Now, this isn't an Active Directory domain, so I don't actually have any objects underneath of this specific machine, but you can see it's the same look, and all of our Explorers look the same with caveats towards their specific applications so that you have them for it. The comparison to your production, saying what files have changed compared to your production environment. I don't know I've heard many administrators wish that they've had this feature because too many administrators are in their GPO policies or anything within their AD objects. And we're able to show here exactly what's changed, so you don't have to go through and even restore back to older points. Just restore the data
right?
you need.
Yeah, no, that's dead on right. I mean, there's a case of where, the backup product is becoming a difference engine for you, and to your point, you don't have to go restore something. You can just very quickly discern what's different.
And here with Exchange, you're able to restore mailbox. We say mailbox and restore stores. You can restore an entire store if you need to. Say one of your DAGs go offline and you're didn't notice that another DAG that was keeping the redundant copy of that database that you needed was also, out of commission. You don't usually know that until you have a problem. Databases with SQL, we can export our SharePoint, which there's a lot of similarities between SharePoint and SQL. Even our Oracle Explorer, I would say, it's just, they all look the same. Like, you can almost not tell we're switching Explorers here.
Mm-hmm.
I'm pretty sure that's everything that I had. We successfully got up that database over here in from our cloud environment back down to on-prem. We've seen our files in the Azure environment transferred back up here to be able to natively restore in cloud or export in cloud. And we've covered that extract utility, which would allow me to take a file that is on this machine in our backup folder for a local machine, which is just this VBK. This is all you need to be able to restore that extractor utility.
Yeah, maybe the one thing that we could show or just quickly highlight is the ability to import an object bucket. If you say didn't want to do the extract utility, you had an instance of Veeam, but you didn't have your data. You wanted to access data that resided elsewhere, say in an S3 bucket in a cloud.
Okay, so importing down from the object storage, I might have one offhand to do that with. We'll see. So adding an object's, no, sorry. We're adding an object storage as an external repository. And we'll go with Amazon to see if it's there. I recently went through and cleaned up all my old buckets, so we'll see if this one lets me authenticate. Select a data region. That's a very good question. We'll cross our fingers, and it lets us in. And we can do this even from an old bucket. We'll select, doesn't look like there's any folders under there.
Yep.
Here's one. And that's it. It's importing the files right now. We're downloading
And
the
what's cool is
configuration.
it doesn't actually have to move the data payload. It's just moving the metadata associated with that. So you practically instantly, within a handful of seconds, you've got visibility and the ability to manage that data that you just added into this Veeam configuration. And so now in a disaster scenario, you're not having to wait for data movement. You're just simply pointing it at a S3 bucket, obviously using credentials like you went through to make sure that you're entitled to touch that data, but you can essentially remote control that. And the kind of environment we find ourselves in now, this is going to become increasingly more the norm to manage remotely, to manage potentially from your laptop in an alternate location.
Yeah.
I think it's really powerful. You're not having to sort of like telnet in remote console into something. This is your Veeam instance, that's able to just bring in metadata extremely rapidly, and now you can manage it as if you were sitting right next to it.
Yep. And I don't know if there's much more to say, because as soon as it's on here, it didn't matter, or it doesn't matter where the data came from. We can send it back to Amazon, or we can send it over to Microsoft for all we care.
Yep. And you can just,
Or
even though,
locally.
yeah, and that instant recovery, you're able to go and live stream from a cloud instance, that's near you, but it's not necessarily you're not co-resident with it, but you can access, manage it as if it were, you were commingled with it.
Now I think we've covered it. I
There we
mean,
go.
it's that portability. It's in a portable format. It just works.
That's right. That's right. And with an intuitive look and feel, I think that's part of the key too. Is the power's on the simplicity.
Yeah. Did you have any final notes to or words of wisdom to pass along here?
No, I just want to thank you for having me. I really always enjoyed your Twitch streams, and this has been another great one.
I appreciate you joining. I